Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm speaking with adventurer and adventure psychologist Paula Reid. Paula, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Now, you are currently sitting in a Burger King, keeping warm because you're halfway through or almost halfway through a cycle ride. I think you're about 30 miles in at the moment, are you?
Yes, it's a 66-mile journey. I decided to cycle to see my mum in Gatwick, and I've just eaten a huge burger, so I feel sort of slightly sick now.
Well, fair play to you, because that sounds like a nightmare to me, which is probably what we're going to be talking about today, the individual differences when it comes to going on an adventure. But look, it would be great to hear about you, adventure psychology. Wow, that sounds like something different. You are an adventurer. Wow, that sounds amazing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Paula Reid? Tell us about your background and what you're doing now.
Okay, thank you. It's always good to say I'm an adventurer, if you can put that on your badge at a party. So I have been adventuring since I was about 17, which is a good few years, and I love exploring and travelling, backpacking. So I've done a lot of travelling generally, but I've done some of the bigger sort of expeditions too. So I've skied from the coast of Antarctica to the South Pole, which took 46 days. That was a biggie. I've also yacht raced around the world, which was all the way around, circumnavigated the globe. That was a 10-month adventure, and I've paddled the Mekong, and I've paddled a couple of other rivers. I've cycled across 12 countries, and I've walked across 3, and I generally try and pack my life full of experience because I believe in living life to the full. So there's that side of things which I love. And then 2 years ago I did a degree in positive psychology, and I chose to do my dissertation on exploring why adventurers adventure. So what's the purpose, the meaning, the benefits, the positive psychology side of adventuring? You know, why do we push ourselves, and as you say, go through a bit of a nightmare? So that was fascinating. And then since then, I've launched adventure psychology as a brand new discipline. So it is exciting, Dan, and I see it sitting alongside sports psychology.
I just think it's so interesting, digging into some of the things you said there. You made the statement, I do this because I love to live life to the full. And I would, sitting here, looking out of the window, I'm thinking, I love to live life to the full. But I have absolutely... I wouldn't say no. Do I have interest in doing what you're doing? Probably not. I think it's incredible, and I have incredible admiration for what you're doing. And I suppose there's a big part of me that would love to want to do it. And that leads me to the why. And I think that's what I want to unpack. And I think it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation. Why do you do what you do, and why do adventurers do what they do? Because, as I say, I think I want to live life to the full, and I think I do, but I do it through a different motivation or a different lens. But to get that conversation started, Paula, I mean, adventure, when I think of that, I think of so many different varieties of things or types of things. So how are you defining adventure?
Yeah, it's a problematic definition, actually, Dan, and I've struggled with it myself. I think, on the one hand, you could say absolutely anything was an adventure if it felt out of your comfort zone. So if, for one person, that meant making a cake and they've never made a cake before, then that in itself could be seen as an adventure because it was new and exciting and they hadn't done it before. And then there's adventurous activities like kayaking or windsurfing. But for me, when I think adventure, and the sort of adventure that I was researching and the sort of adventure I like to do, it involves uncertainty and going into the unknown. So there's some sort of exploration of terra incognita, if you like, of uncertainty. It always involves the outdoors, because any man-made indoor environment like bouldering or rock climbing is man-made, so it's been predetermined and pre-scripted. So really, therefore, it's not really full of uncertainty. and you need the climate and the conditions to make it a bit more interesting. So for me, an adventure for me is going on an adventure. It's at least a couple of hours. It might be years, and it's going into the unknown and exploring, and inevitably having some sort of challenge and difficulty on the way.
I think it's really interesting, Paula, because you mentioned, adventure can be baking a cake. Some people might see it like that, the adventure of the unknown of baking a cake and how it's going to turn out. And it almost feels like a continuum there. I might be simplifying this a great deal, but it almost feels like a continuum from something like baking a cake, which could be perceived as an adventure, right the way through to skiing across the Antarctica, which you did. And that's probably a pretty long continuum there, right? But I think it's interesting, and I do want to try to relate this to sports psychology and sport for our audience as much as I can. And I think, we've just had the Rugby World Cup final, and I know you watched that yourself. And would you say that's an adventure for those England rugby players as well? What's your perception of that? Is a sports person going into a competitive event, is that an adventure?
Generally, I'd say no. You could still argue that it was, because there are unknown outcomes.
Yeah.
As we well know, watching the game with New Zealand, and there are uncertainties during the game, and it's a fluid, flowing game. But really, that's being picky. For me, generally, no. I would say that was a sport, in that it had a fixed period of time. So quite often sports are fairly fixed in a time period. It's certainly not for weeks or months. And the sort of state of play is fairly known. So you generally know where you're playing the sport. There are borders to that field of play quite often. You kind of know your own abilities and personal bests and record timings and ability to kick or shoot or swim, and you know who you're up against, who the competition are. So there's lots of knowns. So for me, I and I'm sorry, Dan, I'm not a sports psychologist, but I generally describe sport as a peak performance, but in quite fixed conditions.
Interesting. I think what I hear you say is there's a great deal more adaptability to that adventurous notion of skiing across the Antarctica or paddling the Mekong or cycling across 12 countries, is that because you're experiencing extraordinary variability in the landscape, extraordinary variability in the challenge. While sport has a great deal of variability, and every sport will differ in terms of its variability. 10-pin bowling is different to rugby, is different to golf, and is different to tennis, etc. What I hear you say is that because the landscape is always changing, because the process is always changing, then it requires a great deal more adaptability on the adventurer, him or herself.
Yes. Every person I interviewed for my dissertation, the one common description was not knowing what's around the corner, and that's just a nice way of saying the uncertainty and, as you say, the variability. So it's more enduring. There's more uncertainty, and I think it requires a different skill set and a different mindset. So I'm sure there are overlapping principles or concepts between sport and adventure for sure. But, broad brushstroke, it's more enduring, much more uncertainty, and also an amount of fear or the requirement for toughness. So I know playing rugby, you do need to be tough, but there's a sort of fear and stress element with adventure where you've not only got uncertainty, but quite often you've got quite challenging or dangerous conditions.
When you mention dangerous conditions, what's the relationship between adventure and extreme sports? Are they the same thing? Is there a difference there?
Extreme sport have been defined very much hooking around risk, where a mismanaged move or a mistake could lead to death. That's a known sort of description that's been used in some academic papers. So risk and likelihood of fatality if you do something wrong is quite often the definition of an extreme sport, whereas adventuring it could be something like, cycling around the world. There's loads of opportunity for accident, but it's not necessarily risky or thrill-seeking or likely to end in death.
Right. Okay. It can do, but it's not as risky as, say, an extreme sport, is what I hear you say.
Yeah, I mean, over the hours, and if you work out the maths, probably the amount of hours that you put into cycling, you're more likely to have an accident, of course. But at the moment, the sort of academic definition of extreme sport is a mismanagement or mistake could lead to fatality.
Okay, cool. So let's unpack why. Why is it that? What's the difference between yourself and myself, Paula? Why are you so engaged? Why is this living life to the full for you, as compared to someone like myself? And I'm going, wow, okay, awesome. Full credit to you, but not for me. Why do people become adventurous?
So I still enjoy sport, and I can be competitive, of course. There's a great joy with sport, and the competitiveness is more sport than an adventure, of course. But if you take this morning, Dan, it was blooming cold this morning, and I decided to go for a 66-mile bike ride. Now, that's an area where sport is slightly combining with adventure, I'd say, because cycling is a sport, of course. But from the adventure point of view, it was 66 miles on a route that I'd never cycled before, and you are dealing with the conditions and the weather and the traffic and the geography. So I didn't fancy that when I got up this morning at 6 o'clock. It was dark and it was cold, and I'm middle-aged and comfortable. So why on earth get on my bike and put myself through that? But then once you start, you've got that absolute awe and wonder of, yes, it's cold, but wow, isn't it beautiful to be up at sunrise and cycle next to the water with the sunrise reflecting the water and the ducks and the swans preening themselves in the morning, and then you get that lovely thrill of physical activity. So it's feeling fresh and you're feeling fit, and you've got the flow experience, which is where you're challenged but you're capable. But then the real difference between adventuring and sport starts where it gets tough. And I believe adventurers choose proactively to push themselves enduringly through tough, challenging conditions in order to not only test themselves, but to grow, to develop their strengths and their resilience and their wisdom and to grow from it. So it's almost like we put ourselves on our own hero's journey, or if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger, proactively. And it's called type 2 fun. So you don't enjoy it at the time, but afterwards you feel amazing.
So what I hear you say is you're doing it for that adrenaline rush that you'll experience post adventuring. However, during adventuring, you will have it. You can have experiences that are wonderful, such as the scenery, such as simple achievements of pushing yourself through. You can have that. Just going back to how you started that narrative there, you said you woke up this morning and it was absolutely freezing cold, and you've looked out the window and there's frost on the ground. I suppose, with my own story, my own narrative, I remember getting up early to practice golf. I was a pro golfer, and I knew I had to do that. I mean, it was my profession, there was that, but I had to push myself. So going back to this morning, even though you might enjoy it, I mean, do you have to push yourself before you did the Antarctica skiing? Did you have doubts? Did you have worries? Did you have to create a narrative that forced you to push forward with things?
Yes, definitely. Every adventurer is different, and we've all got different motivations and needs and drivers. One of my main ones is I really believe, as I said, in living life to the full and making the most of it, and that includes the dark times and the tough times and the fun times. But generally, I would say that we all have a sense of purpose. The why point. So for skiing to South Pole, why on earth would you want to do that? It's arduously, relentlessly tough and really not very enjoyable at all. So for a start, you've obviously got the end goal of actually arriving at the South Pole, which is a great, vision and end goal to aim for. But also there's that absolute wanting to find out what I'm made of, knowing that I can dig deep and really test myself, explore geography externally, but also explore myself internally. What am I made of? What am I capable of? Living on the edge, living an extreme life, feeling fully alive, having to get fit for it. So many reasons to do these things that really keep us pushing and motivated to have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning.
I love what you've said there, and I think there's enormous parallels with competing in sport or motivating yourself to participate in sport. And I think, Paula, this has some really interesting parallels with our passion in my profession to get people doing sport, to get people up and out. I love what you've said there. I mean, it sounds like before you go on an adventure, you might have a mental wrestle with yourself, but you remind yourself, you create a narrative, you use your self-talk to remind yourself, come on, this to me is living life to the full. You focus on your end goal. You think about the psychology of possibility on your external capability and your internal capability. You're focused on increasing your fitness. I think those are the kind of things that you're creating a story that's driving your motivation to go out and do it.
Yes. It's wrapped up in our identity as well, isn't it? So part of me is like, I am Paula, the adventurer, as I introduced myself at the start. So part of it is, I expect myself to go and do these things, and other people expect me to too. So part of it's wrapped up in my identity. Part of it is my belief to live life to the full. But now I also know cognitively and emotionally that it's the right thing to do for my life because it really is strengthening me, conditioning me, toning me, physically and psychologically. So it's a bit like going to the gym, but it's just a long gym session.
Absolutely. When you've completed a journey, have you experienced a sense of greater resilience, of growth? Is that part of the process as well?
Yeah. Totally. I would say they were the two biggest outcomes from any adventure, and they were the two strongest points that came out from my research. So resilience is a muscle, and we can continually develop it and strengthen it. And of course, the more resilient we are, the more resilient we can be. Next. So that's really useful. And then, growth generally. So it expands our world when we adventure. Geographically, you learn and discover new countries, you meet new people, you discover your inner capabilities, and it grows you psychologically and makes you generally healthier. So it's a really positive, optimum, flourishing and functioning thing to do. And even in trauma, which we can come on to later, maybe, resilience and growth come from trauma, but you can still grow and learn and get wiser from trauma. It's not necessarily a negative. There could be a post-traumatic growth.
I think just sticking with that resilience piece, I mean, I'm looking at your research here, and for the audience, you can actually get access to Paula's research here, and your piece of work research that I'm looking at is called Exploring the Psychology of Extended Period Expeditionary Adventurers, Going Knowingly into the Unknown. I love that little title there, Going Knowingly into the Unknown. And it's very much what we would describe as a phenomenological piece. So you're interviewing people's experiences of going on an adventure. And in terms of that resilience, I think it's interesting because sometimes you wonder if you're developing resilience in one domain, you wonder how much, Paula, it spreads into another domain. And so you've got one bit of feedback here from somebody called Dora, and Dora describes how she evolved through adventuring. She says, I was more confident and able to cope with anything. I don't panic, don't love it when things go wrong, but I know that I can absolutely hold myself together under any circumstance. That sounds really arrogant, but I've done that many times and I actually thrive. However, put me in front of a computer that's not working and I've got a deadline and I panic. It's weird. And I think something I've always been quite passionate about is noting that every context is different. Is that something you've noticed about yourself, if you don't mind me asking, which seems like a personal conversation, is you can ski across the Antarctic or the Antarctica, but are there things in everyday life that you find yourself coming to a bit of negative emotion?
Yes, I'm human, Dan. I admit it. I think this is fascinating, isn't it? You know, it's in these little unusual discrepancies that it gets interesting. So yes, of course. So for me, I think part of it is just, you know, your mindset. Are you mentally prepared to ski across Antarctica? And if so, your body psychologically and physically is geared up for something long and tough. So whereas, you know, if your laptop suddenly doesn't work, you're not ready for that. You haven't anticipated it. And you're physically and mentally, you know, not in the right place to deal with it. So part of it is just the state. I think the state that you get in a good way, knowing, anticipating what you're about to go through, and therefore you pull on all your resources physically and mentally to you know, they say, you know, your blood's up or something like that, don't they? You know, you're ready for it, you can cope.
Yeah.
I know, for instance, if I'm running or cycling or whatever in a storm, I enjoy it because I suddenly feel all my energy come out and I'm like, yeah, bring it on. Whereas if I'm walking with a small blister on my foot and it's drizzling, then I'm really grumpy and I can't cope. So there is something about our amazing resources, both physically and mentally, that come to the fore to support us and help us through the really, really difficult times. And also we are human. So yes, you know, I'm not a perfect positive psychologist with every aspect of my life, and nobody is. But isn't that interesting that Dora felt she could really cope with so many, you know, courage, confidence and coping come with being on an adventurer, and yet of course sometimes it's the little things that we're not expecting that bring us down.
Hugely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do have to ask, you know, how did you mentally prepare to ski across the Antarctica? What specific things did you do?
Mentally, so there was so much, Dan, and this was before I did my degree, so it was before I knew, you know, really psychologically, cognitively what I should be thinking and doing. But for instance, I talked to quite a few people. I sought and met up with quite a few people that had skied to the North or the South Pole, just to hear their experiences. They obviously had tips for me, you know, which were really useful about kit and stuff. But if you can start to really imagine and empathise and put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's done it, that really helped. I also read loads of books, some of which of course put me off because, you know, if you read books about Scott and the Antarctic, it's a grueling, horrendous, traumatic story, you know, and everyone was posting these books about Shackleton and Scott and Amundsen through my letterbox, and I was like, oh no, I've got to read another traumatic story about people dying in Antarctica. However, nonetheless, talking to people and reading, you begin to imagine and almost put yourself out there. There's something that I now know called anticipatory thinking, where you do pre-imagine quite often the worst day that could, you know, where everything goes wrong, and think yourself through it before you actually do it, which is a bit different from visualizing success. So it's imagining, thinking ahead, anticipating, talking with people, reading stuff. And then I also kind of coached myself. So what attitudes would be useful to have when I was doing this trip. What do I know about myself? Self-awareness and self-awareness of strengths and qualities that I will have to use when the going gets tough. So I did a bit of a stock take, if you like, about my own life and qualities and thinking patterns, to line them up so that they were ready for when it got really bad. Things like that. It was quite a lot.
I was going to say, I mean, you said this was before you did your positive psychology degree. I mean, I think it's fantastic. I mean, the three specific things, just going back to the first one, if I was to put my psychologist cap on here, I hear Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory, because, you know, when you go and talk to people and you hear, yes, you get techniques and little tools from them, but also you hear of the success that they've had. And this is Albert Bandura, the psychologist who researched self-efficacy and coined that term, would say, well, the belief that you have that you can accomplish a task is increased when you find out that others have done it. So that's what he would call vicarious experience. Your anticipatory thinking I love, and I would use with sports competitors. I think that's one of, you know, we talk about the importance of visualization, as you said, visualizing success. I mean, it's actually, for me, more important is visualizing what you're going to do when it's going to get tough. You know, and you want sports competitors to do that. And then I love what you say about those self skills, the self-awareness piece. Who am I? It wasn't just simply, you didn't just punch the air and say, I'm going to go and achieve this. This is going to be what I do, and this is going to be easy and simple, etc. It sounds like you explored who you are, what your strengths are, areas maybe you need to manage from your own personality characteristics where you feel there might be limitations, and you were able to articulate what that looked like. So it sounds like you went on a serious mental skills journey, if you like, before you went on your skiing journey. I mean, when you reflect back post positive psychology and knowing what you know now, if you could get in a time machine and go back, is there anything you would do different or anything that you would add to what you did?
Yeah, sure. I think what I did before was really common sense, Dan, because, you know, I had been adventuring and travelling quite a lot up to the time I went, which was 2014. So I think I'd just acquired a little tool bag, kit bag of knowledge that I'd made up naively, but it was kind of common sense, and having felt the highs and lows of the psychology of these things, I knew how important it was and how it was going to affect my performance. So that was sort of common sense and built up from past experience. Then, having learned everything properly on the degree course, you know, you learn your theories and your models. I think there just would have been a bit more structure and a bit less groping around. So I think these theories give us things to hang, you know, hooks to hang our knowledge on, and some structure. So there's a model. Right, okay, yeah, that makes sense now. There's a before and a during and an after. Or, you know, goal setting. There's a load of theory around setting goals, and I probably would have done that a bit more with a bit more discipline. So I think it would have been clearer, quicker, and more disciplined using what I've learned on my course. As it was, I think I roughly came up with the right content. It just took a bit of searching and you know, brainstorming, I guess, for it.
Absolutely, and what I love about the paper I've got in front of me is, I mean, you've got a paragraph here where you refer to a lot of psychological models that are important for performance, probably important for adventuring. You know, you say here, going knowingly into the unknown combines the positive psychological paradigms of intrinsic motivation and control, exhibited by self-determination, that's Ryan and Deci, hope, which is Snyder, goal setting, the classic Locke and Latham, proactive coaching, mastery, the psychology of possibility, which is Ellen Langer's work, growth mindset, hey, we all know Carol Dweck, openness, which is Professor Barbara Friedrichsen, courage, which is Puri, and creativity, Csikszentmihalyi. So, I mean, it sounds like you feel that adventuring really does cover the whole gamut of the whole array of psychology, performance psychology.
Yeah, and it was an interesting sort of juxtaposition between the going knowingly and then into the unknown. And I think that's quite an exclusive combination with adventurers, for instance, compared with sports. Because going knowingly, you just do your absolute best to prepare, so you're not being too risky or reckless. Whereas into the unknown, you are actually slightly being reckless, because you are allowing yourself, or you're proactively making yourself step off into this huge terrain of uncertainty and challenge and potential difficulty and trauma. So that's a fascinating tension again between the two. So it does combine an array of concepts as you've described, and that's why I like the going knowingly into the unknown phrase, because it combines your real sort of proper cognitive thinking and preparedness and goal setting and mastery, with then the lovely sort of freedom, liberation, courage and openness, and creativity and curiosity, by stepping off into the unknown. And I really think that combination of qualities is great, because on the one hand you're being super intelligent and cautious, and on the other hand you're going, what the heck, let's jump.
Yeah, there's that tension, that sweet spot. I mean, in terms of the unknown, I'm sure that a lot of adventures do involve some pain, or the potential to have pain. And what I found interesting in some of the narratives from your research, some of the feedback from these participants who you interviewed, was their relationship with pain. And their love-hate relationship. I mean, going back to Dora, she said, some of my difficult times have been some of my best times. Joanna says, I've got a masochistic pleasure in pushing myself. Ted laughingly remembers, I just wanted more pain. I wanted more pain. I mean, that takes a particular type of person, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think it's as black as you're suggesting, Dan. This is bring it on. I don't think it's as dark and masochistic as it sounds. It's actually, I think it's more about feeling fully alive. So I think pain and fear are both grim feelings for human beings, and yet, one, they truly make you feel like you are very, very alive, because the feelings are sharp and extraordinary. And two, if you can cope with pain and fear, then wow, you're building your skills, you're building that confidence and resilience, and then again you've got that afterwards feeling of, yeah, I made it, I survived, I'm okay. And I'm the same. I know, I don't enjoy pain, I don't enjoy fear, but I know it's a peak experience, and if I can battle through it, I feel super alert and aware and present. And then of course afterwards, it's an interesting life experience that probably made me more resilient, more wise, and grown a bit. Grown as in GROWN, not the other GROAN.
Although you could be partaking in some groaning as you're doing it. Look, I love what you've said there, and you've spun it nicely there in terms of, this is feeling alive. It reminds me of the idea, the notion that it's, why do people watch sad movies? Why do people watch, I suppose, why do people watch violent movies? There's possibly a range of reasons, but I know that I believe that people like to rehearse negative emotions, and I just wonder if there's a part of this is that they like to feel alive. You want to experience a range of emotions, and then put yourself in a position to enjoy the growth from dealing with those emotions. That's kind of what I hear you saying.
Yeah, and be ready for life, because I get a lot of pushback from people saying, what the heck, can't I just sit in my armchair and watch the telly for my whole life? Why on earth do I have to climb a mountain or swim an ocean or ski to South Pole? And obviously I say you don't have to do those things, but there's a sort of state called languishing, where you don't really push yourself, you don't really go out of your comfort zone, and therefore you don't really grow. And if you were a plant and you languished, you'd basically die. And as a human being, if you languished, you're probably almost going backwards in relation to the world spinning forwards. So I do think there's an aspect of staying fit, evolutionary fit, physically and mentally, in order to cope with inevitably the challenges that life chucks at us. Because if we do sit in an armchair and watch telly every day, then when something happens, which can happen, such as an illness or a loved one, having cancer or something awful, then where's all your resources to be able to cope with that?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting, and we almost we're coming back to this statement by from Dora in terms of her laptop breaking down situation, and I just want to dwell on this for a little bit, because I think it's an area that certainly I'm interested in, because I'm certainly not cynical. I'm a little bit sceptical when team coaches, so I'm coming back to sports here, will say, well, I'm going to take my athletes, I'm going to take my players, my team rock climbing, and they're going to learn resilience from rock climbing or mental toughness. I don't love the term mental toughness, but mental toughness or mental strength from rock climbing. And it's like, okay, all right. But I think where they're coming from is, well, they're going to climb a rock and they're going to develop some mental toughness, and that's going to help them on the pitch. And it's like, yeah, I see that. I can see the parallels. I get it. But at the same time, there are active, directive ways that people can use mental skills on a pitch or a course or a court that could be more context specific than actually going rock climbing. But I do see the parallels.
Yeah, sure.
There's not a question there, but yeah, what's your thoughts?
Well, I just think there's loads of learning in context, and there should be learning context. But a bit like creative thinking or innovation, having an oblique angle or a cross-fertilization of disciplines, I think can open up the mind to new thinking and new skills.
Yeah.
So, and you become a bit more sponge-like again to have a fresh perspective and to learn new skills, but also perhaps change your programming.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. Can adventure be therapy? You mentioned trauma earlier. Can adventure be therapy?
Yeah, there's loads of research and organisations that exist, and there is such a thing as adventure therapy or wilderness therapy, outdoors therapy. I think everyone knows now that being outside is good for us, being in touch with nature, having fresh air, and physically moving. They're all really good for us. So no matter what activity you're doing, nature, fresh air, and just moving are good enough, and great therapy. Let alone the physical content of that.
And in terms of, so I know you have a big part of your life. You have a company that does this kind of stuff with organisations in the corporate sector. And is that very much what it's for? Is it a therapeutic thing? Is it a high performance thing? How do you tend to go about helping, I suppose, the normal population who are working people go on an adventure? What might those adventures look like? And where's your involvement there? How are you helping them manage themselves through that adventure?
Yes, so I think having an adventurous mindset is useful generally in life. So I've launched Adventure Psychology, and it's not really for adventurers. They've kind of got it pretty sussed themselves already, but it's almost for everyone else. And 3 examples could be a school child age, 15, 16, and having to cope with the pressure of exams, and trying to help them through that. They've got a potentially fairly traumatic and challenging period of months ahead of them, and perhaps youngsters these days haven't got the skills to cope as much as they used to have. So that's one example. Another example might be in business. A whole company might be going through a restructure.
Yep.
And if they worried about it too much, it would really tense up their thinking and their creativity, and they get more stressed. Whereas I try and portray the idea of looking at it like an adventure. It might be the wrong word, but a long and enduring journey full of ups and downs and uncertainties. And therefore, what are the skills and mindsets and language that are most useful around it? So in business, a lot of it is about making the right decisions when there's uncertainty and whilst under pressure of performance in difficult situations, and also being less mentally stressed about these projects and ventures and challenges. So it relieves stress as well, as improves performance when things are uncertain or difficult.
And what's next for you in terms of your next adventure? Is there anything big on the horizon?
Well, I'm in the middle of one which is, I call it 50 Good Turns. I've made it up, it's like a game. And I've decided to cycle across all 50 countries of Europe and do a good turn in each one. So I've cycled 12 so far, got another 38 to go, and I'm loving this project because it involves exercise, travel, meeting people in all sorts of different countries, and the challenge of everyday adventuring from A to B, trying to do about 80 miles a day on my touring bike. So that's really good fun. I'm really enjoying it. And I'm waiting till next spring till I perhaps do some more countries.
Wow, amazing. Where have you been so far?
I tested myself doing the length of Britain because I wasn't sure. I'd only ever cycled one day before, and I wasn't sure whether I could cycle many days in a row. And it was 830 miles altogether. So it took, I think it took about 11 days, and that was a little test. So John O'Groats to home, which was on the south coast, and I did it, and it was great, and I loved it. So that was my starter. And this year, for instance, Hungary and Slovakia.
Incredible. Awesome.
So yeah, I've done 12. They're all different. They're beautiful and interesting. And then in December, I've got a cushy number of sailing around the Caribbean on a 90-foot yacht.
That sounds horrendous.
Sometimes.
That sounds horrendous, Paula. How are you going to psychologically prepare for your navigation of the Caribbean?
It is sometimes hard to relax.
Yeah. I'm sure. And look, I suppose my final question is, you really have piqued my interest, and I know you will have piqued the interest of the audience. Without sounding like a sales pitch or whatever, why should people do adventuring? I mean, you've given us loads of reasons. Why should people get involved in adventuring? How would you sum it up for me?
My deep answer is that life is an amazing gift, and ideally we really allow ourselves to experience it fully and in the present. And I think adventuring really facilitates being in the present moment, which makes you feel hyper aware, and then you get all these awesome feelings of wonder and beauty and joy and growth and stimulation and strength and resilience and grit and courage and, amazing qualities and feelings. So from a selfish point of view, I think it really makes the most of this one gift that we've got called life. If I was being a bit more broader, the bigger picture, it really helps us to explore the world, to really understand it and see it, and to connect with other countries, other geographies and other people, which I think can only be a good thing.
And explore ourselves, explore our inner identity, our inner values, and look for inner growth.
Yeah, I think it sorts us out a bit too. So if we were in a negative place, let's say, I think it can fix things quite nicely. So it gives you perspective.
Really, really fascinating, really interesting. And look, I would push every listener to read your paper, because I just think there's some great information on there on a range of psychological topics that would be really relevant for everybody and very, very relevant for sports coaching. I think it's a really, really interesting piece. Paula, how can people get in contact with you? How can they learn more about you, your business? Are you on social media? Give us a lowdown there.
Okay, and also, in addition to what you just said, Dan, I think let's all just start banging on about adventure psychology as a new discipline. You know, all you sports psychologists out there, let's start defining and separating, you know, the two things. And, you know, I think they are different. And if us adventurers and adventure psychologists and researchers and academics and people can talk under that banner, then I think it can only help both disciplines to really progress.
Well, do you think, just a quick question before you tell us about how to contact you, do you think you're saying they fit neatly together, you think they're different, but they share common relationship, and you'd like to build an adventure psychology community?
I think there's a little overlap, which is fine. There is with everything in life, I suppose. But I would like to segregate them for the sake of both of them individually, so that all the discipline and learnings and teachings and philosophies and models and concepts can sit separately under each umbrella. But I do think they sit alongside each other, and there's a lot that sports people can learn from adventurers and vice versa.
I'd agree.
And so thanks for having me on your podcast, Dan, because you've opened up your sports psych podcast into a bit of consideration around it.
And I completely agree. I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think we could certainly learn a lot. And from speaking with you, it's opened my mind to the importance of adventure and the benefits, and how psychological it is, which is great, which is brilliant. And so, if somebody would like to learn more and possibly be a part of this new community and help it thrive, how can people get in contact?
Yes, thank you. So there's two elements. There's the Paula Reid stuff. So if anyone wants to know more about me and my adventurers, past and present and future, paulareid.com, REID, and the Paula Reid on Insta and Twitter. And then adventure psychology-wise, adventure-psychology.com is the website. So there's a load of stuff there and a contact page there. And again, on Instagram and Twitter, it's adventure psychology.
Brilliant. Well, Paula, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. It was really, really interesting, and I'm looking forward to learning more about this area.
Well, thanks, Dan. As I say, thanks for cross-fertilising the two and having an adventure on your programme.
It's certainly been that. Well, listen, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me exactly what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm really looking forward to next week's show. Bye for now.